What if everything you were taught about aging was incomplete, not wrong in detail, but wrong in its conclusion? I ask that question as a man who has lived 98 years inside this body. I have watched friends grow old beside me. Some bent early, some broke slowly, and some seemed to dissolve under a weight they were told was normal. Pain in the morning, fatigue at noon, pills at night. They called it aging. I did not accept that answer because I was aging too, and yet my experience did not match the story. Aging is real. Time leaves its marks. Hair thins, skin loosens, recovery slows. I am not here to deny biology, but suffering, constant pain, metabolic collapse, fogged thinking, bodies inflamed and exhausted, those did not arrive with age itself. They arrived with something else. And once I saw the separation, I could never unsee it. We were taught to merge two different processes into one word: aging, which is universal and unavoidable, and suffering, which is neither. When those two are fused, people surrender too early. They stop asking why their joints burn, why their sleep collapses, why their strength vanishes decades before it must. They are told, "This is what happens when you get old." That sentence has shortened more lives than disease. I am not offering hope as comfort. I am offering it as correction. There is a path of aging that includes adaptation without constant pain, decline without degradation, limitation without misery. I have walked it not by luck, not by genetics, and not by denial, but by understanding what suffering actually is, where it comes from, and why it does not belong to aging itself. In the parts that follow, I will separate what time does to the body from what we do to it. I will name the sources of suffering plainly: behavioral, nutritional, environmental, and medical, and explain how they quietly accumulate until they masquerade as old age. This is not about living forever. It is about not suffering needlessly while you live. When I say that suffering is not a natural consequence of aging, I am not speaking philosophically. I am speaking mechanically. Suffering has sources. It accumulates. It follows rules. And most importantly, it arrives long before old age, but is only blamed on aging once it becomes impossible to ignore. I learned this distinction by watching patterns, not people. Two men could be the same age, born the same year, raised in the same town. One would wake stiff but functional, tired but clear. The other would wake in pain, medicated, inflamed, already exhausted before the day began. Time alone could not explain that difference. Something else was at work, quietly compounding for decades. The first mistake we make is believing suffering announces itself loudly. It does not. It arrives as small tolerances we accept: slight joint pain that becomes routine, sleep that grows shallow but is dismissed, digestion that slows and bloats brushed aside as normal. These are not aging symptoms. They are early warnings. And when warnings are ignored long enough, the body escalates. Pain, for example, is not a feature of age. It is a signal of inflammation, compression, nutrient deficiency, or mechanical misuse. Joints do not ache because time passed. They ache because tissue repair fell behind tissue damage. That imbalance begins in midlife or earlier, long before the word elderly is ever used. Inflammation is the great masquerader. It hides behind familiar labels: arthritis, heart disease, diabetes, neurodegeneration. But inflammation is not fate, it is a response to what we eat repeatedly, how we move or fail to move, how we sleep, how we stress the nervous system, and how often we override the body's signals with chemical relief instead of correction. I watched men treat pain as an enemy to silence rather than a message to decode. They swallowed pills and pushed through, believing endurance was strength. What they did not realize was that painkillers do not remove the cause of pain. They remove feedback, and a body without feedback deteriorates faster, not slower. Nutrition is another quiet architect of suffering, not starvation, excess. Excess sugar, excess refined starch, excess industrial fats. These do not kill quickly. They inflame slowly. They thicken blood, disrupt insulin signaling, stiffen arteries, and starve cells of micronutrients even as calories overflow. People think malnutrition looks like emptiness. In modern aging, it looks like abundance without nourishment. I'm not talking about diets or trends. I'm talking about cellular requirements. Cells need minerals to conduct signals. They need amino acids to repair tissue. They need fats that bend membranes instead of hardening them. When those needs are unmet for years, repair slows, waste accumulates, energy falters. That collapse is later called aging, but it began decades earlier as neglect. Movement follows the same pattern. Aging does not steal strength suddenly. Inactivity does. Muscles atrophy when they are not demanded, bones thin when they are not loaded. Balance fades when it is not challenged. By the time a man says, "I am too old to move," he is often already suffering from the consequences of not having moved enough years before. Then there is the medical system itself, well intentioned, reactive, and often incomplete. Modern medicine is exceptional at crisis. It is less effective at prevention. It treats symptoms in isolation: blood pressure here, cholesterol there, pain everywhere. Each treatment makes sense alone. Together, they can dull the body's capacity to self regulate. I watched men become collections of prescriptions rather than integrated systems. One drug for sleep that worsened balance, another for pain that slowed digestion, another for blood sugar that encouraged weight gain. None of these were malicious, but none addressed root causes either. Over time, the body carried the burden of both disease and treatment, and suffering deepened. Psychological suffering follows similar mechanics. Loneliness, chronic stress, unresolved fear. These are not emotional abstractions. They alter hormones, suppress immunity, tighten muscles, and inflame tissue. Men who carried constant tension aged faster, not because they worried, but because their nervous systems never rested. Repair requires calm. Without it, decline accelerates. This is where the great misunderstanding lies. Aging reduces margin. It does not create damage. When margin is wide, the body absorbs mistakes. When margin narrows with age, the same mistakes become costly. People think age caused the suffering. In reality, age removed the buffer that had been hiding it. That is why suffering appears to suddenly explode in later years. It was never sudden, it was cumulative. Once I understood this, everything changed. Aging became something to respect, not fear. I stopped asking how to stop time and started asking how to stop unnecessary harm. I stopped chasing youth and started preserving function. The goal was not perfection, it was coherence, aligning daily inputs with what the body actually requires to maintain itself. Suffering is not a punishment for living long, it is a bill for long term imbalance. And bills can be reduced, renegotiated, or partially forgiven if you recognize what you are paying for. In the next part, I will explain what an alternative aging path actually looks like in practice, not as theory, not as optimism, but as a set of corrections that restore balance and dramatically reduce unnecessary suffering, even late in life. Once you understand that suffering is not an automatic consequence of aging, the question changes. It is no longer, how do I fight getting old? It becomes, what must be corrected so aging does not turn into suffering? That shift is everything. An alternative aging path does not mean escaping decline. It means guiding decline so it does not collapse into misery. It means maintaining function even as capacity narrows. I did not discover this path through theory. I found it through adjustment, watching what restored balance and what quietly drained it away. The first correction is redefining pain. Pain is not an enemy to silence. It is information to interpret. When pain appears, it is signaling overload, deficiency, or misalignment. Joints hurt when tissues are inflamed or under-repaired. Muscles ache when recovery is insufficient. Nerves misfire when nutrients or blood flow are compromised. Treating pain without asking why it exists guarantees its return in stronger form. The men who suffered least were not those who endured pain stoically. They were those who responded early. They rested strategically. They adjusted movement patterns. They corrected deficiencies before damage hardened into chronic disease. Pain addressed early rarely becomes suffering. Pain ignored almost always does. The second correction is restoring metabolic calm. Much of late life suffering originates in unstable blood sugar and chronic inflammation. These two forces quietly erode every system: joints, heart, brain, nerves. Aging bodies tolerate metabolic chaos poorly. What a younger body absorbs, an older one amplifies. Stability matters more than excess. Regular meals that do not spike insulin, foods that nourish rather than inflame, hydration that supports circulation and cellular function. This is not about restriction for discipline's sake. It is about removing constant internal stress so the body can redirect energy toward repair. Inflammation recedes when inputs stop provoking it. Joints loosen. Energy returns. Sleep deepens. These are not miracles. They are predictable responses when the internal environment becomes less hostile. Movement, too, must be redefined. Aging bodies do not need punishment, they need signal. Muscles remain responsive well into old age if they are asked to work within their capacity. Bones maintain density when they feel load. Balance improves when challenged gently and consistently. I did not move to stay young, I moved to stay capable. Capability is the currency of non-suffering aging. The ability to rise without pain, walk without fear, lift without strain. These preserve independence, dignity, and calm. Once capability is lost, suffering multiplies rapidly, not because age increased, but because autonomy vanished. Restoration also requires respecting recovery. Aging slows repair speed, not repair ability. When rest is inadequate, repair never completes. Sleep becomes fragmented. Muscles remain sore. The nervous system stays tense. Many men mistook exhaustion for weakness, when it was simply incomplete recovery repeated for years. I learned to treat rest as active medicine, sleep protected, stress reduced deliberately, silence allowed. The nervous system must downshift for healing to occur. Without that downshift, even perfect habits fail to deliver results. Another crucial correction is reducing chemical dependency where possible. I am not opposed to medicine. I am opposed to medicine replacing understanding. Drugs can be life-saving. They can also mask root causes while adding new burdens. Each chemical intervention must be weighed against what it corrects and what it disrupts. When men reduced unnecessary medications by addressing causes, nutrition, movement, stress, systems often stabilized. Fewer side effects meant clearer signals. Clearer signals allowed better decisions. The body regained a voice. Psychological correction matters just as much. Chronic fear accelerates decline. Fear of pain tightens muscles. Fear of falling weakens balance. Fear of aging itself drains resilience. The men who suffered least did not deny reality. They accepted limits without catastrophizing them. Purpose also plays a role, not as inspiration, but as regulation. Men with a reason to rise each morning moved more, thought more clearly, and endured discomfort without panic. Purpose steadies the nervous system. A steady nervous system supports healing. None of this requires perfection. It requires alignment. Aging narrows tolerance. That means habits must become cleaner, not more extreme. Small daily corrections compound powerfully over years. Late correction still helps, but earlier correction multiplies benefits. The alternative aging path is not secret. It is simply obscured by noise, by the belief that suffering is noble, inevitable, or unavoidable. Once that belief dissolves, responsibility returns, not blame. Responsibility. Responsibility to stop mistaking damage for destiny. I did not eliminate discomfort from my life. I eliminated unnecessary suffering. I accepted stiffness without despair, slowness without panic, limits without humiliation. And because suffering receded, aging became quieter, steadier, and far less frightening. In the final part, I will bring this together, not as instruction, but as perspective, so the line between aging and suffering remains clear long after these words end. So now I return to the question I asked at the beginning. What if aging was never the enemy, but suffering was? After 98 years, I no longer see aging as a collapse. I see it as a narrowing. The margins shrink. The room for error diminishes. What once could be ignored now demands attention. But that demand is not cruelty, it is clarity. Aging removes the illusion that the body can endlessly compensate for neglect. Suffering, by contrast, is not a requirement of time. It is a signal that balance has been lost and left uncorrected. Pain that goes unanswered becomes chronic. Fatigue that is dismissed becomes disabling. Confusion that is normalized becomes decline. None of these are punishments for living long. They are outcomes of long-term misalignment finally coming due. This is why I speak plainly. To confuse aging with suffering is to surrender too early. It teaches people to expect misery, to stop listening, to accept deterioration as fate. That belief harms more than any single disease. Once it takes hold, people treat preventable damage as destiny and never question it again. I did not live nearly a century by fighting age. I lived it by reducing unnecessary harm, by responding early instead of enduring silently, by choosing coherence over convenience, by respecting the body's signals instead of numbing them. None of this made me immortal. It made me functional, and function preserves dignity. Aging will change you. That is unavoidable. But suffering is not owed to time. It is not proof of wisdom. It is not the price of longevity. It is often the result of neglect mistaken for inevitability. If there is one truth I leave you with, it is this: age will ask more precision from you, not more courage. And when you give it that precision, aging becomes something entirely different. Not gentle, not easy, but no longer cruel. That distinction matters more than most people ever realize.